there was a movie starting called Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Pete Gerard was running that. David Jones, Pete Gerard, I can't remember, Dennis Schultz, a lot of people. You know, we basically shared information. We taught each other everything we knew. You know, we learned mold making. We did everything back then. We learned welding. We learned machining. We learned pattern making. I mean, we were on that show for over a year before we shot any film, just making the models and prototypes and stuff. Now, we started that over at Glencoe by the old boss, and then we moved to Hartland. And we were at Hartland for a couple years. We finished up Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers went to TV, and we picked up Battlestar Galactica. We did Airport 79, and then at that time, it was mainly just TV stuff. And then I quit there and went over to Apogee.
And in industrial design, you need to be able to draw your idea. You need to be able to sketch it out and also draft it, and then build what they call a working breadboard model that proves how it would work, and then on to a production mock-up of what it would look like. So you have to have all those skills that you pull together in addition to, or along with rather, having a feeling for practical design and having an idea of how it has to be made and the processes that you go through. So that was right up my alley because I already liked building things and sketching things. So the model making kind of segued into doing those kind of things for industrial design.
And I called Wayne, and Wayne said, come by, and I met Wayne and Pete Gerard. And I remember they took me through the shop, and I showed them my portfolio with photos of stuff I'd built, and I think I brought a couple little things. And I remember walking through and seeing some work, and it was actually Mike Joyce was making, I think it was the forks from the Draconia. And I remember, and Pete was showing me all this stuff in the shop, and I looked at that, and I thought, oh, I could never do that. But I didn't say that. And so the next Monday they called up and said, come in, you're hired. So I ended up working for Pete on Buck Rogers. I started that first. And Galactica was already on the air. It was already, you know, I think probably halfway through the first season, I believe. I don't remember exactly. But I worked on the Draconia mainly then. And then I worked on once that was done, I worked on a bunch of ships, ragtag fleet ships. We would take something that Apogee had built that was a background, like way background model. And some of these were built just because it was for television. And they were going to be this big on the screen. They were just sort of odds and ends thrown together. And so Dave Jones was sort of the art director, sort of supervisor there. And he would do a sketch of what he wanted and bring me this crappy ship. And I would redo it, put lights in it, put a mount, we had an engineering department that made bottle mounts. And so I did that for a while there. And what's funny, when I started at Hartland, it's Ardala's launch was already built. And I looked at it and I go, ooh, I don't like that. I just didn't like it. The design of it. I'm not really a designer, but I know what I like and what I don't like. And I remember Dave Jones didn't like it either. We were both. So I did that for a while there, and then I worked a little bit on Airport 79, and Star Trek was starting, and I got a job on Star Trek. It probably wasn't a good thing that I left Hartland, but eventually Pete Gerard left as well.
Pat McClung was one of the people that I actually got into the union on Buck Rogers. There was 2 or 3 people that came in that had really, really dynamite portfolios, and we needed extra model makers because we had just taken on the model work for Battlestar Galactica after the Apogee guys kind of dropped it in our lap. And so I told Peter Anderson, there's these guys, I got to have these particular guys. They're great. They've got the skills. They've got the attitude. So can we hire them? And Pat was one of those people. Buck Rogers, which was another opportunity to lead a crew and to teach the younger kids how to use some of these more modern materials. John Erland and Lauren Peterson had got me real interested in this stuff. And because of my background with the industrial design end of it, thanks to Lauren, I sort of had a grip on on some of these techniques. And as time went on, of course, it branched out and led to a lot of other interesting discoveries. We had a production manager at Hartland that was overseeing all I guess he was a visual effects supervisor, who was a bit of a nudge and kept coming into the model shop and bugging us and nitpicking and micromanaging every step of the way. And he would be like standing right behind Ken Larson or somebody who's doing this really intricate work on the belly of a plane, getting the scribe lines just right or getting the little landing gear hatch, all of this fussy little stuff, because we wanted these planes to be photographically perfect. And this guy just kept pestering us, and I finally had to go over his head to Peter Anderson and Wayne Smith and complain to them about what this guy was doing, and basically had him banned from the model shop from that point on. Model makers are a special breed, and they have to have conditions favorable to what they're doing. It's fairly intense work, and it's fairly demanding work, and it takes a lot of concentration. If there's a lot of distractions going on around you, it really cuts into it. We did spend a lot of time on the Phantoms, and there was also an F-15, a very, very sizable model of that, 4 or 5 feet long, beautifully detailed, and French Mirage, and also some missiles that were entirely fictitious, black, sinister-looking, fairly simplistic missiles that we did. We found out fairly soon on the blue screen stage that a pure white surface, which is what the Concorde has, is a real bugger when it comes to blue screen, because the slightest bit of blue light bouncing off of that white into the camera, you've got inconsistencies in your mat. You've basically got holes. They call it blue spill, and it was the bane of blue screen model making. If you had surfaces that for some reason or another did that, reflected blue onto the camera, then the mats couldn't be perfect, couldn't be done correctly. So we figured out a color of yellow that they could be painted instead, and then optical would do would straighten the color balance out later on. And it worked out perfectly. The yellow primer that we put on those planes was such that the blue just disappeared.
You know, I know how the model shop felt about building stuff and putting it on stage and having things continually get broken off. And you're thinking that the stage guys that are programming the motion control, not paying attention to what they're doing. When in reality, they really are, and they have a lot of things to keep in their mind to get the camera to make the proper move. So I know how the model makers felt, and I know how the stage guys felt, because I had to work with them enough. And having been on the stage end enough, like on Star Wars, on the night crew, that I would see from their point of view how they felt. You know, they felt really bad, but it was something, you know, the model's a tool. The camera's a tool, and you use the tools to the best advantage. And if something gets broken once in a while, well, that's tough. I mean, you know, it happens. Fix it, and let's move on. But at one point, when I was art director at Hartland, and we were doing an airport movie with the Concorde, everybody was really, really, really unhappy with the number of times models would get something knocked off over and over and over. And especially the little bits, the antennas and things that would get knocked off. And it wouldn't be so bad, except that it wouldn't just come off and leave the model nice and you have to put it back on. It would break out a chunk of the model, and you'd have to patch that, and then you'd have to repaint it. And painting that to match up with the aging and patinas that we get is really, really hard to do. So on the Concorde, we came up with the idea of using X-Acto knife blades. There were some really small, 3/8 of an inch long maybe, antennas that were on the Concorde that were right in the areas that we knew would probably get hit by the camera, or people not paying attention to what they're doing when they're mounting the model or taking it off. And so we used number 11 X-Acto knife blades because they're really, really strong, but also really, really sharp. And if people know that something's on that model that's going to hurt them if they're not really careful with it, then they treat it with more respect. So we actually have number 11 X-Acto knife blades cut to the shape of these antennas that are in scale with the model and everything that can do harm if you're not really careful with it. It'd come to that.
We had a sign at Hartland that, because of the strains that we were working under, and I think I'd stolen this quote from somewhere, but it said, "We, the faithful, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. We have been doing so much with so little for so long that we are now qualified to do anything with nothing." And I put this sign up in the model shop. And a couple days later, another sign appeared from management that said, "All model makers will bathe daily before reporting for work. Since we have to kiss your ass to get you to do anything, it might as well be clean."